Scott Whimpey here from First Aid, Accident and Emergency and Team Nike Hammer. So this is Seminar 2 and I'm going to talk a little bit about training for the event and the specific training that you may require and that your team needs to get through this 96-kilometre event. A lot of people come to me and they say, well listen Scott, I'm looking at roughly a timeline of maybe 25 to 30 hours. What sort of training do you think it is that I need to do? And I'll say, well, what have you done? And quite often they'll say, I've done a few walks here and there, and I've done a lot of cross training in gyms, and I do a bit of swimming and bike riding and things like that. And that's all very well and good. And I usually say to them, well, have you done any training over the course at all, up and down any of the hills? And they say, no, I've never been over it before. I'm just going to see what it feels like when I get there. And God, that's probably the worst thing that I can hear from people like this. Really, if you're going to train for an event like this, you really do need to spend a little bit of time out there on the course. But then I hear the other side of the spectrum where a lot of people just do all of their training on the actual course. And I'd probably have to say 50 to 60% of them don't actually make it to the start line because they end up being injured, they fall over, they end up with ITB issues or knee issues or foot issues even before getting to the start line, which is very common. So I've come up with a couple of basic tips on training for the event. Now obviously if you decided that you're going to try and go for a sub 20 hour time, then you're going to need to do a bit of running. But if you're going to go for say 25 hours or so, or around that time, that's about the average time for the event, then you really just need to get out and spend a bit of time doing a bit of walking. Yeah, fair enough, you can have a jog here or there, but the majority of it really is just going to be a bit of mostly just sort of hiking through these tracks, because even when you look at the elite teams like ourselves doing that sort of 11, 12 hours, we're still averaging sort of 7, 8 minutes a kilometre. So realistically, like if you think about averaging say 10 minutes a kilometre on this sort of terrain, it really is walking pace. A lot of people say to us, when you do 11 hours and 20 minutes, do you run up and down the hills? And I'd have to be honest to say that probably we don't really run up all of the hills. Fair enough, we'll jog down the hills, but running up the hills sometimes takes a lot more energy. So a fast walk up most of the hills will usually suffice to get your time, where you want to be. So, training for the event, these are the tips that I've got for you today. You really need to start slow, and if you're going to start training, my advice is to start training now and start doing a bit of work now. And really, the training now that I'm thinking about is maybe doing 2 or 3 sessions a week now, unless obviously you are already quite fit and you can do a couple more. But the worst thing you can do is just start by doing 5 or 6 sessions a week, because your body won't handle it. And starting slow with just a couple of sessions a week, 2 or 3 sessions a week, really is going to condition you up for this. So you really need to get your knees conditioned, which is going to take sort of like 6 to 8 weeks, realistically, to get that conditioning that you need without getting injured. Consistency and not getting injured is really the key for this base building phase, okay? I always like to say 8 weeks of base because that's what I do for any of my endurance events. So generally speaking, about 8 weeks of base, which means starting slow, 2 or 3 jogs or walks a week, and slowly building it up by about 10% a week. So eventually, sort of within the next couple of weeks, taking it to maybe 3 or 4 sessions a week, and then over the next 4 to 5 weeks, maybe 6 sessions a week. Now they don't all have to be running or walking sessions. They can be a cycle session or a swim session, but realistically the best thing for doing something like the Kokoda Challenge is to actually train on your feet and get that conditioning going. As mentioned, cross training in the gym is also going to help, guys, because when you're walking, your arms are going, your back's going, your back's sore, all your glutes, you're activating all your knees. So if you can do a little bit of cross training, that's also going to help. Whether that's one of those outdoor interval sessions, that boot camp style of sessions, or whether that's an interval session in the gym. But it's also nice to throw a bit of cardio in there as well. So work a little bit on getting your heart rate above that 110 or 120 beats a minute through that session, and sweat it out a bit as well. That's going to help. Guys, a big key, and one of my backgrounds from sporting background is actually in footwear and working with in the podiatry, helping out, I suppose. I'm not a podiatrist by trade, please don't mistake that, but I've sort of helped people with footwear for years and years and years, and a big common, I suppose, mistake that a lot of people make is they're in the wrong shoes. And I see people doing the Kokoda challenge in things like cross-training shoes of all things. No good. They're built for sideways movement. So that forward movement shoe, we did the Kokoda challenge in running shoes, but I tell you, there's some fantastic trail shoes out there at the moment. So you really do want to have a look at some trail shoes. If you are just going to be doing mostly just walking or running on the road, then I would get not a hiking boot, but a forward motion shoe, like a running style of shoe, for just that nice cushioned, and you need to make sure it suits your foot type. So if you go into a shoe shop and someone sells you a shoe without looking at your feet, walk out of there and don't buy the shoe. You need a shoe that will fit your foot type. Okay, so it's very important that from now you get the right style of shoe so you don't end up with feet, knee or hip or even lower back injuries. So ensuring that you have the right tools for the trade, so to speak. No need to go out there and slog it out over polys or anything like that just yet. Condition yourself up for the next 3 to 4 weeks, guys, before you go attempting something like that, because if you do, you'll end up busting yourself up and getting injured. So really work on that conditioning phase at the moment for the next 4 or 5 weeks before you really get into like your first session on a hill, so to speak, or your first, checkpoint to checkpoint section. Throughout this, obviously, with the first aid background in mind, you really need to make sure that you're staying hydrated prior to, during and after your sessions. Now, a basic indication of whether you're hydrated or not is making sure that your urine is very pale. And I don't want you to go out there and overhydrate, or they talk about hypernatremia, where you actually end up diluting your system so much that you don't have any energy and you end up breaking down. So just be sensible with what you take in with water or sports drinks of any sort. Obviously, we are sponsored by Hammer Nutrition, and so is the event. So something like a Hammer Heed in this situation, just mixed very lightly with water, it's gold. If you're doing massive sessions like over 5 hours, then you will not go past Perpetuum with this. There is also some gels that you can use as well, but just don't overdo it, because a lot of people take in too much and they end up with stomach problems, because when you're going hard, your heart rate's up, your blood's in your legs, and your stomach can't I suppose digest it as quickly. So with these endurance events, it's very careful. You need to be very careful not to overdo your nutrition, but don't underdo it either. You need to be right on that line, which is really going to be practicing in that now. So for me, for example, I wouldn't take any more than around about 500 mils of fluid per hour in total. I'm only about 65 kilos, and I would just mix something like some Heed very lightly. I might have a gel with me that I wouldn't take all at once. I'd just little bits at a time, and I'd work through that. This has been another presentation by Scott Whimpey on behalf of the Kokoda Challenge and First Aid Accident and Emergency. Thanks for watching.